Corinne raised her glass at her Riverside party, then called me a nobody loud enough to rattle the jazz trio's last note. I'm Gareth Huxley, 52, a quiet fund manager, fingering my father's smooth silver watch while the scent of barbecue smoke mixed with salt air. Ever been written off by family and wondered what they didn't see coming? Spring in Charleston carries a kind of weight with it, thick air, heavy with salt and smoke, the kind that clings to your jacket long after the night ends. That evening, Corinne's mansion felt like it had been designed to prove something, every strand of golden light draped across the riverside deck, carefully placed, so not a shadow dared to fall out of line. The laughter floated easy glasses chimed like wind chimes caught in a controlled breeze, and I could already tell before I reached for my second bourbon that this wasn't going to be a night where anyone let me blend quietly into the furniture. I'd been leaning near the deck rail, watching the tide roll in beneath the pilings, when her voice rose above the low hum of polite conversation. "Oh, Gareth, my brother's here somewhere," she said, her tone all syrup and steel. Her hand, clutching a stemmed glass like a weapon, gestured lazily toward me, and I felt 24 sets of eyes find my collar, my shoes, my plain dark vest. Then came the dagger wrapped in her smile. He's a bit of a nobody these days, but we love him all the same, don't we? It wasn't the words, not exactly. It was the way her laughter lingered a moment too long, the way a couple near the bar smothered their smirks in champagne, as if my silence was proof enough. She was right. The bourbon in my glass burned hotter going down than the last sip. I let it sit on my tongue a beat longer, like maybe its sting could dull the one crawling up my spine. My thumb found my father's old silver pocket watch in my vest pocket, tracing the smooth curve of its face as I exhaled through my nose. The weight of it, solid, unchanging, kept my temper from bubbling over. I'd seen enough of these evenings to know the louder the spectacle, the hollower the core. That thought alone made me stand a little straighter, even as the murmurs swirled around me. She was radiant, I'll give her that. Corinne had always known how to hold a room, how to draw every eye without seeming like she was trying. Tonight she sparkled pearls at her neck, that practiced grin she'd honed at charity luncheons and gallery openings. Beside her, Dorian offered polite smiles to anyone who came within reach, his eyes darting between guests like a man trying to keep too many plates spinning. He nodded at me once faintly, then looked away before the acknowledgement could grow into something resembling warmth. Around us, the relatives and hangers-on whispered in half-smiles, their conversations punctuated by the delicate clink of ice swirling in crystal. I excused myself when the toast began pretending to adjust the cuff of my jacket as I slipped toward the railing at the far end of the deck. Corinne's voice rang out behind me, praising her circle of success, every syllable dripping with the smug assurance of someone convinced she'd drawn the perfect hand in life's game. The guests chuckled on cue, their laughter bouncing off the deckboards and carrying into the night air, sharp and bright, like silverware clinking in a too-quiet dining room. From where I stood, the breeze carried the smell of hickory smoke and the tang of the river, a reminder that at least the world beyond this party didn't care who I was, or wasn't. I watched the reflections of the lights ripple across the dark water, letting the chatter fade into something distant and unimportant. The deck boards creaked softly beneath my shoes as I shifted my weight, feeling the faint give of the old wood beneath all that new polish. Behind me, Corinne leaned closer to one of her guests, a man with an expensive haircut and a forced laugh, and let her words slip just above the music. "He never amounted to much, bless him," she murmured, sweet as poison, timed perfectly to cut through the saxophone's low notes. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The sting found its mark without eye contact. My hand slid into my vest fingers, curling around the cool metal of the pocket watch. I flipped it open, the faint tick-tick, steady beneath the chaos of the party, a sound as honest and unchanging as anything left in this world. I whispered to myself, barely loud enough for the river breeze to catch. Maybe it's time. The words drifted into the humid air, unheard by anyone but me, as I closed the watch with a soft click and fixed my gaze on the slow, rolling tide below. The laughter carried on behind me, but for the first time that night, it sounded distant, like static on a radio. I could finally tune out. The condo was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the muted calls of seagulls somewhere beyond the double-pane windows. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The warm glow from the desk lamp was enough pooling over the worn surface of my desk as I spun the safe's dial by memory and pulled out a heavy folder. The sound of the metal latch releasing was sharper than I expected, as if reminding me why I'd kept these papers locked away in the first place. I spread the folder's contents across the desk, quarterly statements, investment summaries, embossed seals on crisp balance sheets. Each page carried the weight of years spent working quietly, while everyone, even my own family, assumed I'd drifted into obscurity. My fingertips brushed the raised lettering, tracing the dates and figures more out of habit than pride. A soft chime from my laptop cut through the stillness. An automated notice from the bank dividend payouts had hit right on schedule. The gentle tone echoed in the room like a subtle drum roll, a reminder that my silence wasn't stagnation. It was momentum, carefully hidden beneath the noise of other people's performances. A week had passed since Corinne's soiree, but her words still lingered in my head, not as a wound, but as fuel. A nobody, she'd said, as if the years I'd spent building planning, securing a future, counted for nothing because I didn't parade it around at cocktail parties. I closed the folder, letting the weight of the papers settle into my hands before tucking them back into the safe. My thumb found the familiar shape of my father's pocket watch in my vest. Its steady weight, cool against my palm, anchored me. It reminded me there was a reason I kept things close, why I let people underestimate me. The tide always turned eventually. The late-night cafe was almost empty when I pushed open its glass door. The faint scent of burnt coffee and bacon grease clung to the air, a smell I hadn't realized I missed until it hit me. In the far corner, under the buzzing glow of a flickering neon sign, Roy sat in his usual spot. He was hunched slightly over his cup, the steam curling lazily toward the ceiling. He didn't look up right away, just motioned for me to sit with the slow, deliberate gesture of someone who'd never been in a hurry a day in his life. "You keep looking like your father," he said, when I slid into the booth across from him. His voice was rough, warm, the kind that carried the weight of truth without needing to raise in volume. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded photograph, edges curling the image slightly washed with age. It was my father standing outside his old office, the silver pocket watch visible on the chain against his vest. Royce slid it across the table, the photo catching a streak of light from the neon as it passed between us. "Quiet success outlasts loud applause," he murmured, watching me more than the picture. He knew it even when people called him stubborn or boring or invisible. "You've got the same blood, Gareth. Let them laugh, let them point, but make sure you're ready when the tide turns." He tapped the edge of the photo with a calloused finger for emphasis. The words weren't dramatic, but they sank in like lead, settling somewhere deep where Corinne's voice couldn't reach. "I didn't say much, didn't need to. I just studied the photo, my father's faint smile, the way his hand rested casually near that same watch now in my pocket. I could almost hear the faint ticking against my chest, steadying my breath as Royce's words settled into the spaces left by a week of silence. When the waitress came by to refill our cups, Royce reached across the table and gently closed the folder I'd brought with me, the one holding the latest reports and letters of intent. His hand lingered there for a moment, not to claim it, but to ground me. Your father built quietly. You're his echo. Don't waste that, he said, his voice softer this time, almost like he was speaking to himself as much as me. Outside, the night air was cooler than I expected. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering as I stepped out onto the empty street. I could still smell the burnt coffee on my jacket, the faint trace of grease from the diner clinging to the fabric. My fingers brushed the pocket watch through my vest as I walked toward my car, feeling its weight, the soft vibration of each tick syncing with my pulse. I didn't need to look back at the cafe. The neon light reflecting off the hood of my car was enough, casting a pale glow that seemed to hum in time with the watch. I tightened my grip on the strap of my folder as I slid into the driver's seat, the quiet streets of Charleston stretching ahead. Whatever came next, I knew this much: the tide was already shifting. I could feel it in the hum of the air conditioner back at home, the chime of my dividends, the flicker of neon over Royce's shoulder, and most of all, in the steady, unbroken tick of the watch against my chest. The house was still except for the faint hum of the heater and the rhythmic tick of the wall clock, a soft, measured sound that seemed louder in the quiet of late autumn nights. Most of Charleston had long since gone to bed, but my home office glowed a pale, unsteady blue from the monitor as I sifted through line after line of data. The blinds were drawn, not that it mattered. The neighborhood was asleep, the streets empty except for the occasional hiss of a passing car. The smell of cold coffee lingered sharp and bitter from the half-finished mug beside the keyboard. I hadn't touched it in an hour, but its presence felt necessary, like a sentinel guarding the piles of paper and digital files that defined these nights. The cursor blinked as I opened another folder, my fingers moving deliberately across the keyboard. Each file I pulled up was labeled by year, organized to the point of obsession, each subfolder encrypted and locked behind layers only I could navigate. There was a tremor in my fingertips, not from nerves, but from the steady focus that hours of this kind of work brings. On the edge of the desk, slightly apart from the neat stacks, lay a 2019 invoice, the words "Confidential Contribution" stamped across the top. The ink had faded just enough that it felt like a relic, a quiet sentinel waiting for its cue in the story I hadn't yet told anyone. I glanced at it every so often, as if it were reminding me how long I'd been playing this game without anyone realizing. A new email alert popped up in the corner of the screen, breaking the monotony. I clicked it open, eyes narrowing at the subject line. From CM Holdings, RE Fund Position. The message was short, almost perfunctory, but the words carried a certain weight. Your capital is the backbone of the fund. Gareth. Couldn't do it without you. I let the message linger on the screen for a few seconds, my reflection faint in the monitor's glow, before filing it away into a secure folder. A small, humorless smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Not pride. Not yet. Just the acknowledgement that every move I'd made in silence was about to matter more than anyone around me realized. I reached for my leather-bound notebook, the one that still smelled faintly of ink and worn paper, and began jotting dates, transfers, dividend receipts, audit sign-offs. Each entry felt less like record-keeping and more like moving a piece across a chessboard. There was satisfaction in the order of it, in the sense that every square, every line was leading toward a checkmate no one but me and Royce could see coming. My pen scratched softly against the page, blending with the steady tick of the wall clock, and the low hum of the computer. The phone rang once, its vibration rattling the papers on the desk, before I snatched it up. Royce's voice came through low and even, as if he could sense the hour and the weight of what I was doing. Still awake, he asked, not unkindly. I glanced at the piles of statements, the faintly glowing monitor, the invoice with its faded stamp. "Not much time to sleep these days," I said. He didn't try to tell me to rest. He just reminded me with that measured calm of his. "Keep your head down. Keep your pace. You know where this leads." And then he hung up. No pleasantries. No wasted words. It was all the reassurance I needed. A soft tone from the computer pulled me back. On the screen, a small window popped up, backup complete. The message blinked once, then faded, leaving the desktop clear again. I leaned back in my chair, the old frame creaking under the shift of my weight, and let out a long, steady exhale. The office smelled of cold coffee and the faint tang of machine oil from the heater vent, but the atmosphere felt almost calm for the first time that evening. A quiet smirk tugged at my lips, not born from any need to celebrate, but from the anticipation that the hours, the files, the careful positioning were about to converge into something undeniable. The tick of the wall clock seemed louder now, each beat stretching out into the stillness. I turned my eyes toward it, watched the second hand creep past the 12, and whispered into the empty room. "2 more moves and they'll see who I really am." The words felt steady, measured, swallowed quickly by the silence. Outside, the faint gust of a coastal wind rattled the edges of the window, as if the city itself had paused to listen. I closed my notebook with a soft thud, the pages snapping together like the final note in a practiced chord, and stared for a moment at the faintly glowing monitor before shutting it down. The blue light faded, leaving the room in shadow, but the clock's steady tick carried on a metronome for the work still to come. The restaurant smelled of garlic and rosemary, a warmth that clung to the heavy winter air each time the door opened to the street. I arrived to find Dorian already at the bar, his smile wide, and practiced the kind that showed just enough teeth to be convincing. His eyes, though, couldn't sit still. They darted between the bartender, the bill folder left near the register, the reflection of Corinne in the mirror behind him as she adjusted her hair and inspected her lipstick. When he spotted me, he spread his arms like we were old friends, meeting after a decade apart, but his laugh, brittle and thin, didn't reach his eyes. We were seated near the back, a table set beneath a mural of an Italian coastline painted to look sun-washed and distant. The music hummed low, some soft jazz instrumental, just loud enough to muffle nearby conversations. Corinne busied herself with the menu, her attention skimming past me, like I was one of the painted boats in that mural decorative irrelevant. Dorian, on the other hand, leaned in too often, each question coded in casual curiosity, but sharpened by something else. "So, Gareth," he began, after the waiter poured the wine, swirling his glass but not drinking. "Still keeping busy with whatever it is you've been doing since leaving the firm. I mean, we never hear much. Must be relaxing, huh? Low stress, steady trickle of income." His smile twitched as he glanced sideways at Corinne, who didn't bother looking up from her plate. I let the question hang there for a beat, tasting the rosemary bread the waiter had set down, letting its earthy warmth ground me, before answering with a neutral, "Busy enough. Keeps the lights on." He chuckled, a sound as brittle as the stem of his wineglass.
Good, good. Must be nice not to worry about, obligations."
His hand brushed the edge of his napkin, folding and unfolding it as though it were keeping him from wringing his fingers. I caught the faint twitch of his jaw when the waiter placed the check folder at the edge of the table near him, and it told me more than his words ever would. Corinne finally looked up, her expression unreadable, her tone neutral as she remarked, "You've always been good at living simply, Gareth. Admirable, really." Admirable wasn't the word she meant, but I let it sit between us, heavy and unchallenged. The cold hit me like a slap when I stepped outside later, the smell of rosemary still lingering on my coat, and the faint notes of jazz trailing behind as the door swung shut. The walk back to my condo was quiet, the kind of cold that made the air taste metallic. The glow from the street lamp outside my window painted the walls in a pale, uneven wash of amber as I shrugged off the coat and set my keys on the counter. My vest pocket felt lighter than usual. When I reached in my fingers, brushed the smooth edge of the pocket watch, and it slipped from my grasp before I could close my hand. The sound it made as it hit the wooden floor was sharp and jarring, a metallic clack that seemed to echo in the quiet. When I stooped to pick it up, I saw the small dent marring its casing, a shallow imperfection, but one that felt like a crack in something I'd taken for granted. I thumbed the surface, listening to the faint rattle inside when I tilted it back and forth. It wasn't broken, not entirely, but it no longer felt like the anchor it had been. The phone rang before I could dwell too long on it, Royce's name glowing softly on the screen. His voice came through steady low, the same calm he'd carried through every storm of my life. "You sound tired," he said without preamble. I told him about dinner, about Dorian's questions dressed as small talk, about the watch, and the dent that felt heavier than it should. There was a pause on the line, a soft exhale, then his reply. "Victory doesn't shout Gareth. It doesn't come polished and perfect. It stands tall, even dented, especially dented." I sat there on the edge of the couch, turning the watch in my hand, feeling the faint rattle and the cold bite of the metal against my skin. The dent wasn't defeat, not really. It was proof of weight carried, of nights endured, of the patience I'd been practicing since before Corinne learned how to weaponize a smile. I realized holding that imperfect watch that I wasn't finished. Not yet. The dent wasn't a reason to quit. It was a reminder of why I couldn't. A soft ping broke the silence, my laptop lighting up from across the room. I crossed over the glow of the screen, casting long shadows on the hardwood floor. The subject line stood stark against the dark background. "Update meeting confirmed, Charleston Fund. Please confirm your attendance." I let the cursor hover over the reply button for a long moment, the weight of the dented watch still in my other hand. The hum of the streetlight outside filled the pause as I closed my eyes, nodded once, and whispered to the empty room. "All right, let's finish this." The breeze off the river carried the faint scent of salt and fried oysters, the kind of air that clings to a linen shirt long after you've left the dockside. Our table sat near the edge of the Charleston Bistro's patio, the canvas umbrellas swaying slightly as a late spring gust teased the edges of the tablecloths. A jazz trio in the corner played softly the upright bass, walking a lazy line beneath the clink of glasses and muted chatter. I held my glass of iced tea, the condensation dripping down and cooling my fingertips as I let my gaze drift out to the slow, unhurried current of the river. It was, for a brief moment, a scene that might have felt ordinary, even peaceful. Then, Dorian's phone lit up. He'd been scrolling absently between bites, thumb flicking over the screen, like he was searching for a distraction he couldn't name. The screen's glow caught my eye as it reflected in the shallow water of his glass, a brief flash of my own name beside the unmistakable line, net worth $25 million. The air seemed to tighten around us, the casual rhythm of the afternoon, disrupted by the way his fingers froze mid-scroll. His eyes darted to me, then back to the screen, then to the reflection in his water glass as though he wasn't sure what to believe. Corinne noticed before anyone else. She paused mid-sentence, a laugh she'd been directing at one of our cousins, faltering into a thin, uneven breath. "What's that?" she asked, leaning slightly toward Dorian. He tried to angle the screen away, but the damage was done. The whisper had already rippled through the group, the kind of murmur that travels faster than any toast. The conversation at the table thinned to silence, save for the low hum of the bass and the distant call of a gull over the water. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I lifted my glass, the cold sweat from its surface sliding down my knuckles, and took a slow sip. The tea was bitter and sweet, the ice clinking gently against the sides as I set it back down. My eyes stayed fixed on the river, watching a boat drift lazily under the bridge, its wake breaking against the pilings in even gentle waves. The world, at least beyond this table, didn't care who I was, how much I had, or what Corinne had said about me 2 weeks ago at her party. Out there, I was just another man breathing salt air. The silence thickened heavy and awkward until Corinne finally broke it. Her voice trembled just enough to betray her polished veneer. Why didn't you ever say anything?" The words landed like a dropped fork, sharp and out of place. A couple of relatives shifted in their seats, their murmurs halting as their eyes darted between us, searching for a spark or an explanation. Dorian cleared his throat, fingers tightening on his napkin, but said nothing. His phone screen dimmed, darkening the reflection of his own unease in the water glass. I let the question linger in the air, the weight of it settling on the table like an unwelcome guest. My hand drifted to my vest pocket, fingers finding the familiar curve of the silver pocket watch. It felt heavier than usual, as if the moment itself had added to its weight. I rested my palm over it, not pulling it out, just feeling the faint, steady rhythm of its tick against my chest. That sound, soft, constant, unyielding, was the only response I needed. The jazz trio shifted into a slower tune, the notes hanging longer in the breeze as the smell of lemon and brine wrapped around us. The tablecloth fluttered faintly in another gust, the only movement breaking the stillness that had overtaken our corner of the patio. I didn't turn to look at Corinne or Dorian. My eyes stayed on the river, the horizon hazy in the afternoon light, as the pocket watch's tick echoed softly in the quiet space between the baseline and the wind. I pressed my palm against it, once firm but unhurried, and kept my silence. Sometimes, words only dull the impact of the truth. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air, the kind of sterile calm that makes every sound louder. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their steady buzz blending with the low rush of the air conditioning. I walked down the hallway with a slim folder tucked under my arm, my shoes clicking softly against the tile. My breath was even controlled, though the thin sheen of sweat on the folder's cover betrayed a pulse that moved faster than I wanted to admit. Inside were the contracts, the letters of intent, and the paper spine of what I'd been quietly building for years. The Charleston Pension Fund, the cornerstone of the life Corinne and Dorian had dismissed as small and forgettable. The conference room was colder than the hallway, a wall of glass letting in the summer light, but no warmth. The family's attorney sat at the head of the table, hands folded, his expression neutral but expectant. Corinne sat 2 seats down, her posture tight, shoulders drawn in, as though bracing for something she couldn't name. Dorian was beside her, pale beneath his summer tan, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against the polished surface. Each tap echoed faintly, competing with the hum of the AC. At the far end of the table, Royce stood with his arms crossed, silent, steady as ever. He gave me the faintest nod when I entered, the kind that said, "I'm here. Just do what you came to do." I sat, sliding the folder onto the table. The leather squeaked softly against the wood as I flipped it open. The papers inside were crisp, each one a deliberate move, each letterhead and signature another piece in a quiet game no one had realized I was playing. One by one, I slid them across the table toward the attorney contracts for the fund letters from investors' projections that didn't boast, but demonstrated stability, longevity. Each page landed with a whisper, the sound of authority spoken softly but undeniably. Corinne's eyes flicked over the documents, her usual air of superiority cracked around the edges. Her lips pressed into a line, and for once she didn't have a clever remark ready. Dorian's fingers stopped drumming for a moment, only to start again, the pace uneven, betraying nerves he couldn't hide. The attorney leaned forward, brows lifting slightly as he scanned the letters of intent, his professional mask, slipping just enough to register surprise. Royce stepped closer, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder. The warmth of his palm cut through the chill of the room, grounding me in a way the papers never could. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, but loud enough that the words reached every corner of the table. There was no ceremony in it, no theatrics, just a simple truth delivered like a benediction. I felt the muscles in my back relax, the breath in my chest settle into something deeper, calmer. I looked up, meeting the attorney's gaze before letting my eyes pass briefly over Corinne and Dorian. "This isn't about you," I said, my voice even unhurried. "Or me. It's about building something lasting. The fund becomes public this fall." The words were plain, almost understated, but they filled the room more fully than any speech I could have rehearsed. There was no gloating, no revenge threaded through them, only the clarity of purpose I'd been carrying in silence all along. Corinne's jaw tightened, her eyes dropping to the gleaming surface of the table. Dorian stopped drumming his hands, retreating into his lap. As he stared at a spot on the wall, his posture deflated. The attorney nodded slowly, gathering the papers into a neat stack, as if assembling the final indisputable proof that the narrative they'd been spinning about me no longer held weight. Royce gave my shoulder a brief squeeze before stepping back, his arms crossing again as he watched in silence. The room seemed to exhale as the meeting wound down, the hum of the fluorescent lights, once again the loudest sound. I closed the folder, its cover still cool and slightly damp beneath my palm, and stood without a word. Corinne was the first to move. She rose, smoothing the front of her dress, and walked to the glass door without meeting anyone's eyes. The click as it closed behind her was soft but final, like the last note of a long, weary song fading into silence. I stayed where I was for a moment, feeling the cold air on my face, listening to the echo of that click in the stillness before finally turning toward the hallway. The hum of the AC followed me out, but it felt different now, less like a chill, more like a steady rhythm underscoring what came next. The shop smelled of oil and old wood, warm light, cutting through dusty windows and glinting off rows of ticking clocks. On the counter, my father's silver pocket watch lay open as the elderly repairman guided its gears back into place. A soft, metallic click signaled the dent was smoothed, the face polished until the silver gleamed like new. In the mirror, Royce's reflection lingered steady, almost like my father's, for a fleeting second. When the watchmaker snapped the casing shut, Royce placed it in my hand, his voice low. It's not just fixed, it's ready. I slid the watch into my vest, feeling its steady tick press against my chest. Outside, humid summer air wrapped around me as sunlight glinted off the restored glass. My phone buzzed, pension fund launch. 1 month. I breathed, deep shoulders easing. For the first time in months, the weight I carried didn't drag me down. It steadied me for what was next. The hall smelled of lilies and polished oak as sunlight streamed through the Civic Center's tall windows, casting soft gold over rows of retirees and donors. A piano played quietly while I stepped to the podium, my father's restored watch ticking steadily against my chest. I spoke briefly, thanking those who trusted me, and the Charleston Pension Fund, never mentioning Corinne's insults or the fortune that had drawn whispers. The applause was polite but sincere as I presented the ceremonial check. Roy stood near the stage, arms crossed, nodding once as if sealing the moment. As I left the stage, my fingers brushed the watch's cool glass, its steady beat in sync with my breath. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the Civic Center's glass doors. I stepped into Charleston's hum, the watch ticking softly, every beat a reminder I was moving forward on my own terms. The sun dipped low over Charleston, warm light brushing the streets as my father's restored watch ticked steadily in my pocket. Its calm rhythm reminded me that real justice rarely shouts, it builds, quietly leaving space for new beginnings. Sometimes life's breaks simply show us which paths deserve rebuilding. For anyone weathering job loss or family rifts, there's always a way forward, even if it looks different than we imagined. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story. I'd like to hear it.